Good morning. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending on where in the country you're dialing in from. My name is Aleksandra Sagan, and I'm a reporter with The Logic, based out of Vancouver. For those of you who are joining us who are not subscribers, I'll just give you a little bit of information about who we are and what we do. We're an online publication with reporters in Vancouver, Halifax, Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. We provide in-depth reporting on the innovation economy. Please feel free to check us out online for more information and to see our reporting. Before we begin the event, I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We thank them for having cared for this land and look forward to working with them in partnership. I'd also just like to notice a few small housekeeping items. For our participants who are dialing in, we do have a question and answer period at the end of the panel discussion. Please feel free to ask your questions during the talk or after, and we will do our best to get to as many as possible. Now I would like to welcome Rose Guerin, a Musqueam elder, to lead us in an opening prayer.
Haichka. Good morning, everyone. I raise my hands to the Telus team for reaching out to myself to say the opening for your virtual meeting today, Haichka. A little about myself. My ancestral name is Anthea, given to me from my father's side. I married into the Musqueam First Nation and have been married for 55 years. I am a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. As the morning events of the day unfold, I would like to share a little story that my late stepfather had told me and my sisters. There was a time when we could communicate across the ways, across our oceans, mountains, before there were ships, trains. At this time, we are blocked as the traffic has increased. Our history has been a fundamental part of First Nations culture for many generations. We have been effective communicators for centuries. The challenge in modern times is to find the appropriate mainstream tools to share our vision with members and the surrounding communities, urban communities included. Creator, we are reaching out to you today as we gather virtually. I thank you for all who are gathered. I ask that you will strengthen each one and inspire each one of us with your peace during this trying time of COVID-19, so that as we journey onwards, we would reach out to our ancestors for teachings and strength to others. Come into our situation, both as a group and individually. Cover us with a blanket of honesty, patience that is not of this world. Peace, love, and unity, and all have a wonderful Christmas. Haichka.
Thank you so much, Rose. Today's event is all about internet connectivity in Indigenous communities, which bear the brunt of Canada's rural-urban digital divide. More than 3 out of every 4 households in Indigenous communities do not have access to reliable, high-speed broadband internet. Telus puts together an annual Indigenous connectivity report that highlights some of their work to help bridge this gap, as well as the difference that reliable, high-speed internet can make to any community. It is my pleasure to introduce the Vice President of Customer Network Implementation at Telus, Shazia Zeb Sobani, for some remarks from our sponsor.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to provide these opening remarks on behalf of Telus. I anticipate the conversation today on the topic is going to be insightful. First, I would like to begin my acknowledgement that I'm joining from the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederation comprising of Siksika, Piikani, and Kenai First Nation, as well as Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nakoda, including Bearspaw Wesley First Nation. Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Telus has recently released our second annual report on Indigenous connectivity, highlighting our work with and our investment into Indigenous communities in BC. At Telus, we understand technology is a great equalizer, but only if everyone has access to it. We believe that connectivity is a human right, and it is directly linked to driving positive economic, social, health, community, and governance outcomes. I encourage you all to read through the stories of many communities that have been shared in the report. By the end of this year, Telus would have invested over $29 million to bring Telus Pure Fiber to more than 20,000 homes, businesses, and schools across 61 Indigenous communities in BC and in Quebec. The power of collaboration between private and public sectors with different funding partners can accomplish truly remarkable and expansive projects. Telus engages directly with Indigenous, federal, and provincial governments, as well as at partners like All Nation Trust Company through the Pathways to Technology project, whom you will hear from today through our panelist, Ruth Williams. We look forward to strengthening and maintaining these partnerships as we work together to increase reliable connectivity in Indigenous communities. This week is very important for us as we are completing a 2-year-long project in collaboration with ANTCO, Pathways to Technology, our primary funding partner, to connect 9 First Nations and 13 reserves and over 2,300 members in BC's remote Caribou-Chilcotin region to Telus Pure Fiber. Earlier this year, in partnership of Government of BC, we connected Williams Lake First Nation to Pure Fiber. Chief Sellars is here to share his story on that. By the end of this year, we will also be putting finishing touches on a project that provides 5,000 residents in 14 remote communities with high-speed wireless internet and mobile services on Quebec's lower North Shore, an area which is only accessible by snowmobile, boat, or helicopters. This was only enabled through a partnership with the federal government and Government of Quebec to install one of most extensive and advanced microwave ecosystem in the world of connectivity. As pandemic persists, these partnerships are increasingly important as there are parts of Canada that are simply economically infeasible for private entities to build alone. Through the combination of a range of technologies such as 5G, fixed wireless, fiber-fed copper, and low Earth orbit satellite in the far north, enabled by coordinating public and private partnership model and supported by federal and provincial policies that unleash both spectrum and funding, we believe all of Canada can be connected by 2025. Today, we'll all benefit from listening to the wisdom and messages from Williams Lake First Nation Chief Willie Sellars, Ruth Williams, and Anne Hilton. On the path to economic reconciliation, it is important that voices of First Nations and Indigenous communities are heard and respected. Thank you once again for the opportunity to speak about Indigenous connectivity, a topic I'm passionate about and one of the critical importance across the country. It is now my pleasure to introduce Chief Willie Sellars from Williams Lake First Nation. Willie Sellars was born and raised in Williams Lake, BC, and is a member of Williams Lake First Nation of Sohwepam. Elected onto Williams Lake First Nation Council at the age of 24 in 2008, Willie was one of the youngest elected councillor in the history of Williams Lake First Nation. After serving 10 years on council, he was elected as the chief of the Williams Lake First Nation in 2018 and is currently in his first term. In his previous work experience, Willie worked as a wildland firefighter for the Ministry of Forest, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations, before returning to his community to assume the position of Special Project Coordinator in the Williams Lake First Nation Economic Development Department. During this time, he was responsible for new business initiative flowing from impact benefit agreement, engagement with proponents in the traditional territories, and community consultation for major projects. Willie is also a published author of Dip Netting with Dad, which won a Moonbeam Children's Book Award and was shortlisted for the Chocolate Lily, Shining Willow, and Ontario Library Association Awards. His next book, Hockey with Dad, is due to be released next year in fall. Willie enjoys his family time with his 3 children, playing hockey with the Williams Lake Stampeder, attending community events, dip netting, and playing fastball. Chief Seller, now I would like to offer you ceremonial tobacco in recognition of your contributions here today at the forum.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that warm introduction, making me blush first thing in the morning. I just wanted to thank Rose for the opening remarks and starting us off in a good way. In every single one of our territories, the way that we start meetings with ceremony and prayer is something that's becoming the new norm with the acknowledgement of the territory, and it makes my heart glad to see it, to acknowledge it. Shazia, thank you for that welcoming as well. It's the synergies as we see in Indigenous and a non-Indigenous country are getting better and better. We can really start realizing a lot of the healing that's going on in every single one of our communities. As we talk about rural connectivity today and what it has done for my community on a number of different fronts, it's allowing us to address a lot of the issues that we're currently having in regards to healing. It's giving us another tool in the toolbox, so to speak, to get people healthier, to connect those off-reserve members to our on-reserve membership in our elders group. It's allowing us to operate at the speed of business. It's allowing us to continue down this path of reconciliation and economic reconciliation. But that being said, there's still a ton of work to do. Raising awareness about the connectivity issues in every single one of these First Nation communities across the country is something that I love being a part of, because I know how much it's changed the trajectory of our community. As we look at, First Nation communities, but non-First Nation communities alike, we really take connectivity for granted, especially in these urban centers where it's the norm to have 50 megabyte per second speeds or higher, and when you don't have that, it gets frustrating. And you don't have to look too much further than my kids. When we don't have a good internet connection, how frustrated they get across the board when it comes to dealing with dad. And I feel the wrath of them, and I felt the wrath of the membership, and I'm sure that Telus and every other high-speed internet provider, the province, the feds are starting to feel it now, especially in a COVID era. As we look at, what COVID is, what this pandemic is doing, and it's changing the way people look, changing the way that people meet, changing the way that we engage, changing the way that we, tell stories and send our messages and connect with people on a number of different fronts. It shows the importance of how valuable a high-speed internet connection is, and again, every opportunity that I can to speak good things about Telus, I'm going to. Every chance I get to advocate for high-speed internet connectivity in First Nation communities, I'm going to take that opportunity, because I know how important it is. I have to look no further than a lot of the First Nation communities around this area in Williams Lake. If you're not familiar where Williams Lake is, it's Secwepemc territory, first of all, but it's the hub of a number of different First Nation communities. So we have the Carrier, Secwepemc, Chilcotin, all surrounding Williams Lake. That's 15 First Nation communities, the majority of which do not have high-speed internet connection. Now, when we're negotiating and meeting as a Secwepemc Nation or the Northern Secwepemc Nation, or we're looking at putting together meetings with any of the other nations, then I guess the importance of having a high-speed internet connection is really seen and comes to the forefront when we're getting lag issues or disconnections, and there are some frustrations there for sure, but that shows some of the work that we need to do and some of the awareness that we need to raise around this to get the funding bodies in place and bring partners like Telus on board to help us get there. I know with us, as we, take back our health station, we look at, our healing plan as a community, and language, culture, ceremony, revitalization. We're not going to be able to do that with our off-reserve membership and even our on-reserve membership in our elders group without a good internet connection. That's what we're continuing to strive for and get better at, learning these different platforms to use when we're engaging with membership and teaching them the ways and advocating for, for health. But it doesn't end there. I mean, I said earlier, it allows us to operate at the speed of business. It allows us to continue to deliver services to our membership and provide good services at the many businesses that we run and operate, and corporations that we own and run as a government and as a community. All of these things all come to a head at that connectivity piece. I had a fun conversation with a youth, actually. I was outside tinkering away in my yard last night, getting my outdoor rink going, actually, setting up some outdoor lights, and he had seen it, so he had come over. The weather isn't good enough or isn't cold enough yet for an outdoor rink in my territory, surprisingly. That's a whole other issue that we have that we're going to have to address with the creator. But we were talking about how the world is nowadays, and he was a New Hulk member, but he lives in my community. He's grown up in my community. He's a very powerful young man, a great storyteller. I always tell him that he's the best storyteller that I know, and he's young. He's only 18. He was talking about the importance of connectivity, really random conversation, but he said, what happens when connectivity is not there? We start to see things fall off the rails, and that's when we start to look at the importance of culture, the importance of ceremony, the importance of language in these First Nations communities, and where we're at as a community, and teaching those and learning those, and advocating for them in a positive way in a COVID era is definitely challenging and not a possibility without connectivity, in my opinion. And he understood that, and he addressed it, and he conversed with me about it, and it just shows you the power of where technology is at today. Our young ones are coming up right now, and they're learning these new ways. They're talking about these new ways, and they're looking down the road and seeing the vision of where we can be and where we want to be and where we're going to be moving forward into the future. And for that, I'll raise my hands up to Telus. Thank everybody. Bit of a long-winded welcome, but up Cookby Willie Sellars runs Quest T'exelc Squep Mulu. Hello, I am Chief Willie Sellars, and I'm very honored to be on this panel today, and I'm very honored to be able to open this up and say some words to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Sellars. He'll be joining us shortly in our panel discussion, but we'll give him a break for just a moment while I introduce our two other panelists. They are Anne Hilton and Ruth Williams. Anne is the CEO and founder of the Indigenomics Institute. The Institute's mission is to work with Indigenous nations, organizations, governments, and private industry to strengthen Indigenous economic capacity and achieve Indigenous community and economic objectives. Our other panelist, Ruth, is a project manager for Pathways to Technology. The initiative works to bring affordable and reliable high-speed internet connectivity to all 203 First Nations in BC, and our Telus spokesperson mentioned that they work with Pathways as well. So we'll begin the panel discussion, and I think we'll start off with Ruth, who I'm hoping can tell us a little bit about through her work with Pathways and visiting some of these remote communities, what some of the social, educational, and health benefits of having access to high-speed internet are, and what it's like in the communities that don't have that. What is the downside of not having this high-speed internet access?
Thank you. Shall I start?
Yes, go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the welcome, Cookby Sellars, and thank you for the welcome from our elder, Rose Guerin. Very much appreciated. I guess most important, because I don't appear to be Indigenous, but I am status. I'm originally from High Bar, and I do have a link to your community, Chief Sellars, which I'm from ISK has informed me that I am connected. So I'm certainly looking forward to pursuing that when I have more time. It's hard to look at the starting point here. You know, we're at a point in time now where with economic development, we have to look at reshaping the status quo to be a bit more resilient in the future. But connectivity is so much more than just economic development. So let me just step back a bit and tell you what the situation is in British Columbia. And Chief Sellars, you're one of the ones that benefit from circling back and getting high-speed internet. We had to come into your community at the beginning and connect you wireless. And that was a very challenging for your community and your members. It just doesn't work. Unfortunately, a lot of our communities are in that current situation, still with wireless. So our challenge of connecting 203 First Nations in British Columbia, we're about 15% from completing that. But there are more communities at the outset the goal was to connect to 5 meg. We know 5 meg is almost useless. So, and there's not enough funding to go and circle back and upgrade. So if we were to do that, if we had to go back and circle back and upgrade to a higher speed internet and a user-friendly bandwidth, we would be having to upgrade 250 communities of First Nations, and our goal was to connect the seat of government, and that's the main community where the band office is and the services are. Now, I don't know, Chief Sellars, how many other reserves or other secondary communities you have, but there's a real void in going back and making sure that all communities have access. So that was not part of Pathways plan, and that I think is a priority in the future. So with those secondary communities, there's about 400 altogether that who may or may not have access to services depending on their location. So we've got the ones that have to be upgraded, the communities that were not necessarily connected to begin with. We're talking about 9,500 homes that are affected by that. So when we look at the impact of internet, you look at what it accommodates. Access to the language. We have these groups that provide services for us, and education being one, language being another, health being another, and but for them to truly be able to exercise and provide those services, they have to have access to high-speed internet. And it's really challenging and it's really unfortunate. Like you may have, and in British Columbia, again, we're different. Decisions are made about internet universally, and they're made normally from Ottawa. Now, they're looking at the situation, for an example, in Alberta. We can't be compared with that. We have 203 First Nations, some with as small as having less than 10 homes, isolated, different terrain, difficult to access, and in some cases, we don't even have access to that transport to be able to do the last mile. And the other thing is, transport is one thing. To get that access from that point of presence at your community, the edge of your community, to the homes in your community and to the services is called last mile. And that may be another provider. So economic development, just one example, there's one of our coastal communities where we had to work together with Telus and Hydro and the province to be able to enhance the bandwidth along the corridor from Port Alberni to Tofino, to be able to service our communities along that corridor. And they did not. One of them had such a beautiful campground there, but they didn't have access to internet. So anybody that goes camping and they go and they set up their rig, the first thing they want to do is get on their phone or get on their iPad or whatever and connect to internet. So it was really challenging for them. It was challenging for one of our lodges to be able to book online because they did not have the bandwidth to be able to accommodate that. So there's so many things. I can't, so many things to touch on, and I don't want to take more time, but it affects everything in our lives. It affects education. We look at a small community that maybe has 10, 12 children starting from grade 1 up to grade 12. How do you give them access to the sciences or to the maths? They should be able to have access to that through connected schools. But if you don't have the bandwidth, they can't have the access. So
Excellent examples of how of what it's like to not have this and what some of the challenges are. And I'm hoping Carol Ann might be able to jump in here and give us a little bit more information on, your focus is very much on economics, so on the connection between economic equality and connectivity and this whole concept of leaving no one behind and how it plays in here and why it's important.
Great, thank you very much. You can hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Anne Hilton, I'm from signing in from the Lekwungen territory in Victoria, BC today. I just wanted to extend congratulations to Telus on your leadership of supporting connectivity and your remarkable focus in terms of that connectivity and the impacts that establishes. I wanted to note essentially what a strange week, because I joined my language class online from the Heshkuyat Nation, and I had historical recordings from our elders in the 50s and 60s, and then our current elders as speakers, and then the learners, and really all being in 10, 20 different places, but realizing how connectivity has brought us together in a new way in these times. That is an example. And then I send my daughter to the First Nations Health Authority to set up an appointment for a virtual doctor. I think the realization of the shift of and the quickening of that shift of how we've experienced that within even just the last 9 months has been remarkable to witness. I want to note that as we understand and experience establishment of the reserve system, that the polarization of the experience of the socioeconomic gap of how Indigenous communities are described, there's this consistent kind of language of falling behind. And this idea of closing the digital divide is another example of that. When we realize the size of the gulf that has been made visible, particularly in COVID, around access to computers, access to connectivity, what we are referencing is the ability to support the connectivities, the tools, the resources that support nations at a social, economic, and governance level. When we realize the essence of all three of those, of what connectivity provides, it's important to understand essentially that key organizations such as the First Nations Technology Council, as a core advocate for developing a framework for innovation and technology, examples of leadership around looking at establishing community connectivity checklists, the demonstratable leadership of an organization like that really shapes what becomes important in an initiative like Telus to be able to highlight movement and progress within connectivity itself. I sit on the BC Digital Supercluster board, and as a cross-industry collaboration of diverse organizations across a vast spectrum of healthcare, communications, natural resources, technology initiatives, transportation, all demonstrate key places for innovation that connectivity is the tying thread to all of that. When we realize a significant challenge that I see is the experience of the data gap about not only Indigenous economy, Indigenous governance, and how that data gap really leaves us questions in terms of the growth of Indigenous entrepreneurs, the ability of these entrepreneurs to be able to access the required fundamental infrastructure for that success. I just really quickly wanted to be able to demonstrate a number of emerging Indigenous technology-based platforms that at its essence is connectivity, and where we're beginning to see a strong foundation of Indigenous business success. I look to examples like the Shop First Nations platform, which was established as a response to COVID to highlight Indigenous businesses. But again, realizing that the essence of that intention was also to support small business, bring visibility, and utilizing connectivity in a new way to support Indigenous entrepreneurship development. I look at other examples like One Feather Mobile Technologies, who even pre-COVID was really driving Indigenous governing system and election system design, money system designs in a way to use technology and to increase the role of connectivity in First Nations governance. And then lastly, even looking as an example, it's a Facebook group, but Shop Indigenous Women's Marketplace on Facebook, within just over a month of existing, was intended to be able to support Indigenous artisans in a more visible way, in utilizing the connectivity as a platform. Essentially now has 35,000 members in that short time. So realizing the significance of connectivity to our Indigenous entrepreneurs and to our artisans, I think is essential in framing this discussion of the significant economic impact of connectivity alone as a singular issue or challenge in building our Indigenous economies today. Thank you.
And Chief Sellars, one story that you shared with me that prior to this call was about growing up under a boil water advisory, and you connected that to what it was like to eventually be connected to high-speed internet. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that and that connection that you made, and then what are some of the tangible examples of what your community has been able to accomplish and do as a result of connectivity that it may not have been able to do otherwise without that technology?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's a culture shock. I mean, the commitment by the federal government, for example, to give every single First Nation community clean drinking water is something that is on the forefront of every politician, and we're striving for. Well, we are very fortunate at WLFN. We put a water treatment facility in, I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago now. And that gave us the ability to drink water out of the tap. And even growing up, like I've lived in the community my whole life. I lived in Edmonton for a couple of years, but I haven't strayed away from the Williams Lake region for very long. And having the ability to drink water out of the tap was, it was a culture shock, would be an understatement. Gaining the trust of our water treatment facility and the operators that were there so that I could drink the water was it was a life-changing moment for me, something that my kids now take for granted. But I mean, getting high-speed internet was the same. We had Ruth talking about the satellite systems that were in place before, and that doesn't allow us to operate at the speed of business. And I could give firsthand experience of that. We have some sister communities that are still going through that in their communities, and getting high-speed internet to those communities is definitely something that should be a priority, because it is life-changing. I just look at, Carol touched on a good point about, the artisans in every one of our community. In a COVID era, going to the farmers market or going to craft markets or whatever to sell their goods and sell their work isn't something that they're able to do right now. So we have this influx of individuals that are on SA, these influx of individuals that are relying on the federal government, whether it's through the CERB or through EI or whatever it is. But I mean, we have some pretty cool success stories at WLF in regards to single moms or elders, utilizing platforms like TikTok and Facebook, for example, and marketing themselves in such a good way that the work that they're doing in regards to beadwork or, masks or a number of different things like T-shirts and moccasins or whatever they may be, where we've been able to remove them from SA because they're earning a living because of having access to that high-speed internet connection, being able to market the goods that they have for sale. And that's some pretty positive stuff. That's one of the things that's changing the game in Indian country, and even non-Indian country for that matter. It's opening up this whole other world of opportunity for individuals to take advantage of and market themselves in a way that wasn't the norm before, and wasn't the norm when we had a dial-up connection or something similar to that. And that's what really piques my ears up. I mean, one thing that we have to keep in mind through all of this, though, I think is, and Ruth brought it up, and is there's not enough funding for it. And it does have to become a priority, especially in the era that we're in now, because every single time we connect First Nation communities to that high-speed internet in these rural areas, there's a massive price tag that's attached to it. And that's something that we have to lobby for. And when I got elected as chief in 2018, it's one of the first things that I did was I phoned the Aboriginal engagement rep at Telus, and we started putting together a plan and, looking at what the community connectivity checklist is in my region, starting to check those boxes, starting to bang down the doors of those ministers. And that's something that, I've been very blessed in being able to do. I'm blessed with being a good speaker, but I'm also very blessed with having this amazing team in behind me that allows me and helps me get the audience of those ministers, those politicians, and those connections that are going to get us to where we want to be, which is that high-speed internet connection. But a lot of communities don't have that. They need advocates on the inside, people like Marissa Nobauer with Telus, who are able to push the envelope and help those communities get the audience of those individuals that are going to be able to make change. But again, it all comes down to dollars and cents and giving them access to that in a timely manner. It was a year before we were even able to connect.
I think
internet.
that's
Year and a half, which is, I get it, but it can't happen quick enough, is what I'm trying to say. Go ahead.
Sorry, I think I started losing you, Chief Sellars, but I think that's I'm going to shake things up a little because we're getting a lot of audience questions already, and I want to make sure we can get to some of them. And I think this is a great lead into one of our questions for Ruth, which is that someone has asked, Pathways to Technology seems to have found a relatively greater success than other rural digital infrastructure development plans. And do you believe that the progress you have made in BC is translatable to digital infrastructure development in other parts of Canada? Do you want to tackle that one, Ruth?
I do. Certainly, I will. I think that the success here is respecting our communities, going and visiting the communities, checking with them and seeing what their needs are, and transferring that information to a realistic solution. And like with Pathways, no decision is made by me as a project manager without the endorsement of Chief and Council. So we go in, we chat with them, we let them know these are the options for the solution, and get the approval of those communities to come in and do the work. So I think it's got to be community driven. It's got to also, I totally agree with you, Chief Sellars, you've got to have the money to be able to do it. We were funded 40 million, which also included 10 million for health centers, 5 million for capacity building to connect all 203 First Nations. So you could see how creative we had to be in leveraging funding to be able to get where we're at today. And so the cost, the general estimate of going and circling back, upgrading to give the communities the same as you have, Chief Sellars, and also to connect those communities within your reserve, your First Nations, will cost about, we estimate about $130 million, which to me is not a significant investment for the impact that it will have. And I agree with Carol Ann that the impact that this will have on individual entrepreneurship, being able to connect them to the market through connectivity, is a significant success. And in addition to education and health, etc. And we have to look at the economic impact of this. And as I said, I think, we've got to be more resilient, yes. And we're still building our economy. And then COVID sort of pulled the rug out from underneath us. But as we rebuild, I think we have to become a bit more resilient. And I think that connectivity, we've got to maximize the use of connectivity and to be able to take our rightful place in the economy. I mean, we look at procurement. How can you take advantage of those opportunities, of those contracts, if you don't have access to high-speed internet? How can you do that? How can our community members benefit from Service Canada when they can't even go online? How can our elders be able to use online banking? It's unfair if they have to go into the city to deposit their checks. It's unfair. So there's so many things in the lives of our people, from the elders down to our children, down to parenting, that are affected by connectivity.
I think this plays really well into this idea that's gained a lot of popularity in recent years, that internet should be viewed as a human right. We've had the United Nations say that. The CRTC has said broadband internet is now a basic telecommunications service. And Shazia, in her opening remarks, mentioned that Telus believes that the internet is a human right as well. And I'm hoping that each of you can just take a moment to talk about that as a concept and how it relates to Indigenous communities and connectivity, especially in the broader context of reconciliation. And Carol Ann, I was hoping that you could maybe start us off here.
Yes, thank you. And I think that we're in an environment of the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And if we look at connectivity as a human right and the distinction of the emergence of Indigenous rights, particularly within this province, and also with that experience of a federal bill looking at also the implementation of UNDRIP, what we see then is that bridging the digital divide must play a significant component or a critical component of government's commitment to the United Nations Declaration, and to see Telus have a framework for engagement that, when looking at the report that was released, what really stood out for me was that it was the human experience, that it wasn't corporation to community, but that the people's voices were heard in that. And I think even the demonstration of bringing this panel together humanizes and puts a face to the experience of connectivity and how much a voice and how many other voices have brought the significance of equality, and to really stop seeing the Indigenous population as a problem. I started my earlier point essentially that the establishment of the reserves systems, the concept of last mile, is most frequently referred to Indigenous communities based on our proximity to larger centers, but the realization of the historical development of understanding the inherited perception of seeing the Indigenous peoples as a problem, when driving solutions that engage and humanize and facilitate economic opportunity, health opportunity, governance opportunity, that's really when we realize what the potential is of what we're referring to within connectivity as a whole. Thank you.
Chief Sellars, do you want to touch on the human rights and reconciliation question?
No, I think it's a very valid point, very valid statement, sorry. It definitely is a human right. I just go back to, when the pandemic first shut all the schools down, for example, earlier this year, and I found myself working from home. It was honestly one of the most overwhelming times in my entire life. Not only was I the cook and the cleaner, but I was also the teacher. And, if I didn't have that high-speed internet connection, my kids wouldn't have gotten a proper education. I mean, I'd like to think that I'm an educated man, but when I'm dealing with a 4, a 10, and a 13-year-old and trying to teach them simple math while dealing with a conference call and deck meetings and animals ripping around, it was very overwhelming. If we didn't have access to their teachers through Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever it may be, my kids would have fell, I think, far behind in the school system, and I'm sure that was the case on a number of different fronts across this country in regards to First Nation communities or non-First Nation communities that didn't have a proper internet connection and had access to the education system the same way that I did because of my connection. But I mean, it doesn't just end there. When we're looking at connecting with loved ones, when we're looking at teaching a language class, and we're looking at going through a community engagement process where you need the input from every single one of those members. I mean, it is a right for them to be able to give you feedback on those major decisions going on in community. So I agree 100%. I mean, it should be classified up there. Maybe not as high as clean drinking water, but fairly close because of where the world is at nowadays. And we're going to be in this thing for, most likely another year, which means that we should be putting a bigger priority on it moving forward for sure.
Ruth, I want to give you a chance to get to that one as well before we move on to our next question. Is there anything that you'd like to say on the human rights reconciliation question?
Oh, there's no doubt that I agree that it's a human right. And an example, when you talk about education, I know of an isolated community where those kids have not had instruction for almost since January, because it's a local school. It's not, when we're near the city, we can connect via internet to virtually to our schools to help and support them to instruct. But if we're reliant on our own school and we don't have an instructor and we don't have internet to be able to access that externally, our children are not being educated. So, and also the other thing I'd like to mention is, as we talk about the ideal, you can have access to, say, 100, 200 meg service, but we also have to look at the affordability issues. Some of our communities cannot afford it. So that's where it comes also into that human right, that you can give us access, but if we can't afford to access that, then it's there's a challenge.
We have another question from a listener who is asking, what can us venture capitalists and angel investors do? And I'm wondering if maybe there's someone who wants to volunteer for this one, or Caroline or Ruth, if you have any suggestions for what people looking to invest or help financially might be able to do.
I'll respond.
Go ahead, Ruth.
Quickly. I think that they can't take the full responsibility. I think that the government still has a responsibility to assist us. But if we hadn't have, with the pathways, leveraged an additional external dollars, we couldn't have completed what we did. So there's a partnership here where you can have your First Nations be the lead and be able to also make sure that we connect with the community, and the community is the one that designs the approach.
I think, just being aware of time, I know this hasn't been a very long discussion. I could speak with all of you for hours, I'm sure, and I would love to, but I want to make sure before we wrap that I give you about 30 seconds, a minute each, to touch on anything you may have wanted to say to us today that we didn't get the chance to get to with my questions. So maybe Chief Sellars, I'll begin with you if you want to touch on anything at all, any challenges that remain, anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't get to today. Go ahead.
Yeah, 30 seconds isn't a very long time, but Ruth touched on one thing that really made me think and kind of piqued my interest is, giving the connectivity, but then also, the members having the ability to afford. I mean, some of these communities are so rural, there isn't much of an economy there. So that is definitely a challenge for sure. What kind of subsidies could be involved for those like rural communities that are really struggling to earn an income and be able to pay for that connectivity. Those satellite systems aren't cheap. So I'll leave it there. I wanted to really thank Telus, thank the group for organizing. We're going to be forever grateful, and I feel indebted to everyone that helped us get connectivity, and being an advocate moving forward for First Nation rural connectivity in this country is something that I pride myself on being able to do, and getting the opportunity to do it here is really great for the province and definitely great for the country. But again, what can we do more? What can we do better? We can invest more money. We can continue to lobby, continue to advocate for every single one of these communities that doesn't have that connection, because the longer we wait, the more farther behind those communities are going to be moving forward into the future. And that's something that we can't let go, and we can't forget about, because every single week is, times that by 2 or times that by 5. And next thing you know, there's going to be communities that are going to be so far behind, it's going to be really tough for them to catch back up.
Carol Ann, I'll give you the floor now.
For sure, thank you. Every single day I'm driving this narrative that it's a strategic advantage to be working with Indigenous partners and communities. And when we realize of how much the connectivity is a pillar of that, of Indigenous economic design, what becomes important in that is that this concept of the digital divide, or the experience of this gap, is that it's people-based. And that's really what I want to hold up Telus for doing within paying attention to really building a framework from a community level. I think that what we're looking at is this new space for investment into Indigenous entrepreneurs and businesses, and connectivity is a core pillar. And when we bring conversations like that together, it really brings visibility to the leadership that's required for our success today as communities. Thank you.
And Ruth, last but not least.
I think we have to look not only at the economic benefits, but when I mentioned children not having access to education because they don't have access to internet, I think that should be the motivator. And from there, that motivates us to ensure that regardless of the location and the size of our communities, regardless of that, they have every right to have access to internet, every right. And I think that decisions, when they're made by Ottawa, or they've got to understand British Columbia is much different than Alberta or Ontario. And in making those decisions, they should look at this as an example of how would we approach it in British Columbia.
I think I'm going to wrap things up here as we're running out of time. Thank you so much to all three of you, Chief Sellars, Carol Ann, and Ruth, for taking the time to speak with me and our listeners today, and for sharing your thoughts and your knowledge on this topic. We really appreciate it. I'd also like to take a moment and thank Telus for sponsoring the discussion, as well as their work in expanding broadband coverage in BC. A big thank you to my colleague Amanda Roth and John Packman for producing this event. And if you're a fan of investigative, in-depth journalism, I would encourage you to check out The Logic and subscribe for access to our reporting on the innovation economy. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great rest of your day.